Today we're going to be installing spark plugs on our 1997 Lexus LX450, also called the Land Cruiser FZJ80. This will be the same process on any of the 1FZ FE motors, which came in the 1993 all the way up through 1997. In the US market and in other markets around the world, they use this motor much longer. The factory plugs on these are the copper Toyota Denso units. What has come out many years after these vehicles were built were much better Denso Iridium plugs, which you'll see commonly used on these as a pretty good upgrade. You'll get much longer life out of them, much cleaner spark. They'll last a lot longer. They have much better self-cleaning properties on the electrodes. The exact Denso plug you want is the IK16-5303. There's the part number right there. You can get them at just about any auto parts store or online. And we're going to get started here in just a minute. So if you take a look at your motor, if you've ever done the plugs on this engine, you already know where they are, but they're going to be underneath this valley cover. Valley cover is in two sections. There's one section here and there's one back there. First thing we want to do is get this air intake hose off. In order to do that, you've got this one screw here for that clamp, and you've got another screw here for this clamp. Once you get the two of those off, move this cable out of the way, get it out of that bracket right there. That's part of the hose, and you'll want to wiggle that hose off either end, take it off, put it aside, and we'll put it back on later. The next thing you need to do to get the valley covers off, there's bolts here, here, and then right there and right there on the back section of the valley cover. You can use a 10mm socket, or you can use a large Phillips screwdriver. I prefer a 10mm socket. Doesn't slip as easily, much easier to get them off. So let's go ahead and pull the hose off and then the bolts for the two valley covers. The intake hose is out of the way. Now let's get the valley covers off. Bolt here, bolt there, and bolt there. Let's get all four of those off and pop these off. The valley covers are both off. Now we're going to, one by one, pull the spark plug boots out very gently and replace the spark plug. I'm going to do these one by one so I don't have to remember where all these wires go. The spark plug wires on this motor were replaced within the last 2 years, and they look to be in good shape, so I'm not going to be replacing them. If I were, I'd also pull the cables out one at a time. But since we're not going to be replacing those, I'm going to pull one boot at a time. There's one, there's the next one, and so on, and replace the spark plugs one at a time. So let's go ahead and get started. I've got this first boot out. That's what they look like. When you are pulling them out, the top has a little tab there, helps you pull. Really make sure to grab the entire thing and just wiggle it around, and gently pull up until it comes out. Don't yank it out, you're gonna damage something. Just take your time with each one. When you do pull them out, what you do want to inspect is that they're good in one piece, no cracks anywhere, nothing separating. Check the bottom section and make sure there's no cracks or anything there, because you get arcing of the spark if there is. And then the other thing you want to check for, particularly on these motors and some other motors, is to make sure there's no oil or anything wet on the stem. And the reason you want to check for oil residue is if there is any, then your inside of your valve cover gasket, the donut gaskets that go around each of these spark plug wells, is leaking. And you're going to need to pull your valve cover, replace the outside gasket, and replace all 6 of those donuts. So hopefully that's not the case with this one. First one looks clean and dry, and the valve cover gasket has been done in the last couple years on this motor, so we should be okay, but we're still going to inspect them as we go. Once you get the old spark plug out, make sure to take a look at it, inspect it, make sure everything looks okay. Nothing too crazy that would signify any sort of detonation. This one looks pretty good and clean, and it is a copper plug. It's a Denso copper plug, the OEM application. So we're going to put it aside, we'll make sure to put the plugs in order, so remember which cylinder each one came out of. That way we can judge whether there's any other issues or not once we're all done. So now I'm going to take the new plug, go ahead and thread it back in. Make sure you don't over tighten it, put some anti-seize on the threads, and we'll get on to the next one. I wanted to show you the difference in the copper plugs versus the iridium plugs for those that aren't too familiar with the actual difference. Copper plug has that really fat copper electrode right there, and the iridium plug has a really tiny one right there. Much lower resistance, doesn't take as much of a charge to create the same amount of spark, and they also self-clean the actual electrode much better. So if you get some buildup or gunk or anything on there, the copper ones tend to wear quicker when it comes to getting dirty and fouled. If you're running too rich or if you're burning oil, stuff like that. The iridium plugs have much better self-cleaning action, much lower resistance, and they overall perform much better, but also last tremendously longer without having a whole bunch of degradation in performance. So that's the difference there. I'm going to get this last plug put in, and then we'll get all the wires plugged back in, the last two of them, and get the valley covers on, air intake hose, and last step is to get the truck started, make sure we don't have any misfires, everything's plugged in correctly and ready to go. Now that we've got all of the spark plugs replaced, torqued down again with anti-seize on all the threads, put all the spark plugs boots back in, made sure we don't have any oil leaks past the valve cover gasket. Now I'm going to get some of these wires cleaned up and put back in the clips. Probably better than they were before. It's kind of bulked up right there and bunched up. I'm going to pull those straight and make sure nothing's getting bound up anywhere. Put the valley covers back on, and then in the next video we're going to replace the distributor cap and rotor with the new one. This one's probably 2 years old. I don't like putting more than about 2 years on any of the distributor cap and rotors on really any vehicle. On the newer vehicles with coil packs, obviously they last much longer, but if you've got the old school cap and rotor setup on any motor, you want to replace it about every 2 years, sometimes even every year. If you're on a boat or something like that, I replace them every year. It's cheap insurance so you don't get stuck out in the middle of the water. Anyway, so we're going to get those wires tidied up, put the valley covers back on, and we should be all finished. Hope you enjoyed this video and it was helpful for you just to figure out where things are. Obviously this isn't rocket science. Pretty straightforward replacing the plugs on this motor, especially. They're all right on top. If you like this sort of content, check out the other videos, like, share, subscribe, and see you next time. There we go. All done. Good as new, and should run way better with the new plugs. See you next time.